Tanner from the Posthall Meets York Seminar Series. Today we are interviewing Dr. Efthymia Nakita, a leading expert in biological archaeology. So what led you to choose archaeology and why your particular discipline, the subdiscipline?
Okay, well, I am Greek, so since I was a child with my family we would visit museums all the time, as any Greek family, I'm assuming, and I have to admit I wasn't very fond of museums. I pretty much hated them, but I think it is what they say, that sometimes you choose the discipline that you sort of fear the most, you know, like doctors being afraid of diseases and still becoming doctors to overcome their fear. So I don't know, I guess subconsciously, to some level, in a weird way, I picked archaeology for that reason. As to osteoarchaeology, in my first year as an undergraduate student, I was in an excavation, and we found, it was a Neolithic site, and we found an intact human skeleton, which was probably not Neolithic, we found it in the upper layers. So we had with us in the site an excellent zoo archaeologist. So he would take a tooth and say, oh, that's a cow, middle-aged, upper left incisor, and then we had a whole human being and we were not able to tell absolutely anything about him or her. So I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. Plus I was a big fan of CSI and stuff like that, so it kind of worked well.
Oh, that's great. What kind of different information can archaeologists hope to gather using the methods in your personal studies?
Okay, so from a methodological point of view, I have been using extensively methods that are widely available and have been used by many other scholars before me for activity reconstruction, biological distance assessment and many other things. But I have to say that over the past years I have also focused quite a bit in my papers in refining the available osteological methods, sometimes successfully, other times not so successfully, for instance I have a couple of papers on enthesial changes which pick up on other people's work, very important work, and propose new statistical methods for studying enthesial changes more effectively while taking into account the impact of the multiple factors that control the expression of these changes. Or there have been, what else? Now I'm working on refining the methodology for calculating biological distances using non-metric traits. Again, picking up on where many other highly competent scholars have left. So yeah, my main focuses so far have been activity and biodistances. Well, you never know where I will end up in the future, and I have to admit, I dread the moment where a new scholar will get a paper out there, discarding everything I have done, but I suppose, you know, that's how things go.
Is there a specific software or other technology you would recommend?
Even in osteology, there is so much to be done, depending on the questions you are aiming to address, depending on the available resources you have. So it really cannot be answered. I mean, there is the statistical analysis, there is so much. The geometric morphometric techniques to examine the shape variation, the 3D scanners to examine the morphology.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, where do you start, where do you... I would love to have access to a 3D scanner right now, but this doesn't mean that every osteologist needs a 3D scanner. But for the stuff I have in mind for the next 5 years, a 3D scanner would be pretty cool. So, let's see.
So you think in the field of archaeology, there's anything else that needs to be done?
If we say that in the field of osteology in Greece, what needs to be done, which sort of narrows it down a little bit geographically and from the point of view of discipline. Well, for the biodistances, we need more studies on ancient DNA and on isotopes, but there are currently many very competent colleagues of mine who are working in this direction, either with their Greek colleagues or in collaboration with institutes from the United States and the UK. So in the next, I would say maximum 5 years, there should be a lot of results in this direction. So yeah, this is something that needs to be done and is being done, luckily.
I guess that was more towards younger archaeologists who don't maybe have as much experience or direction, maybe where they...
What would they be happy to do? Well, in my country they would be better off not to study archaeology at the moment.
Oh, no.
Migrate and do something else. All of you listening to us right now. Okay? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of, I would say probably national heritage stuff is a bit catchy at the moment. And we do need to, like I think in Greece one of the main problems is that we have so much material. But I don't know if it is being used in the best possible way. Like you go to archaeological sites and there are no signs, people don't know what they're looking at. So there has been improvement in this direction, like the newest museums that are being built or renovated. You can see that they are amazing. Like I'm proud to be Greek when I visit them. So I would say that this is a direction in which there is room for improvement, and it could have a direct impact also in our economy at the moment, in the society more broadly. So that's where I would point to them, even though it's a discipline that has absolutely nothing to do with me.
More specifically, in your work, you stress non-metric traits as indicators of migration patterns. Besides looking at activity patterns.
Migration patterns, that's correct.
Okay. Besides looking at non-metric traits, for the Grecian islanders, what are some other indicators of migration patterns?
Okay, so first of all, the term migration patterns, even though I use it myself sometimes, I don't like it very much because it implies that all the gene flow we trace, all the genetic contacts, the biological contacts, are the result of large-scale population movements, okay, which is by definition a migration. So I would rather go for mobility patterns, which doesn't have these connotations of a migration in our mind, because they may be, the biological affinities that we find may be the result of mate exchange, of marital networks, of a few individuals just traveling around, small groups and integrating, not necessarily an invasion or a large-scale phenomenon. So it's probably a combination of factors. There is no doubt there were some migrations taking place there for various reasons, but it's also smaller-scale phenomena. Now, I like non-metric traits because they are non-destructive, which makes life a lot easier when you ask for permits from the antiquity services in Greece, or anywhere, I'm assuming. And they are fast, they are efficient, and so on, and they are cheap. So don't forget that my research takes place in a bankrupt country, okay? Ancient DNA, as I mentioned before, ancient DNA and isotope studies can offer very, very important information that complements what we see from the non-metric traits. So from the non-metric traits you can see, for instance, how close or how distant two or more groups are. But with isotopes, with strontium isotopes, for example, you can see if these groups are local or if they came from elsewhere, which is an aspect that you could get indirectly from the non-metric traits. With ancient DNA, you can actually spot the genes themselves, whereas with the non-metric traits, we see the phenotype that is determined from the genes, so we indirectly access the genotype. So these are lines of evidence that can corroborate, plus, of course, the cultural data. So from cultural point of view, we can see that ideas and goods and objects move around, but again, it's an indirect indicator of people moving around, because you may have pure cultural diffusion there, so the materials or the ideas moving around without people necessarily moving with them.
Okay, I just want to clarify quickly what exactly you mean by non-metric traits.
Yes, that's a good question. Non-metric traits is not what I mean. What the literature means in
Okay.
general is, so non-metric traits are morphological variation in the cranium, the teeth, or the postcranial skeleton that is not pathological, but it is determined genetically. Okay, so for instance, dental non-metric traits may be expressed as an extra cusp in one of the molars, an extra root in one of our teeth, and so on. They are not pathological, they don't have any symptoms, but their expression is controlled genetically.
Okay. Oh,
now it all makes sense,
really
doesn't it?
Yes, it does make sense.
Okay.
So do you notice any similarities between the Aegean water traversers and Saharan desert walkers, and how stress and biodiversity affect their morphological traits and migration patterns?
Well, we have two very different things here, so they cannot really be compared.
Okay.
So, for my PhD, when I studied the Garamantes in the Central Sahara, the Garamantes per se exhibited huge variation, morphological variation, biological variation, because they were a big group of people that encompassed probably some local populations, some sub-Saharan individuals. They had contacts with North Africa, the Mediterranean coast, so they were a very, very, very diverse group per se. Now, the Aegean populations I study, I do find variation between them. I cannot say that I have found that much variation at an intra-group level so far, morphologically speaking. It doesn't mean it's not there, but with the Aegean samples, I have to say one of the big problems is that sample sizes, because these are prehistoric groups.
So do you think it has something to do with the landscape that they're in, the area, because in the sub-Saharan they have this much faster. There are a lot more places to walk on your own 2 feet, whereas in the Aegean maybe not so much.
I don't know how this would correlate, to be honest, with their genetic affinities. The Garamantes were rather, not isolated, but well, they were smack in the center of the Sahara Desert.
Right.
So what I found basically in my research is that although they exhibit this great biological diversity themselves, and although from a cultural point of view they were engaged in cultural contacts with many, many other people in North Africa, as was shown culturally, was proven by the archaeological research in the area by David Mattingly and many other people. Biologically, they were rather isolated. So their biological distance from Algerian, Tunisian, Egyptian, and sub-Saharan populations was really, really large. Significant, statistically significant. In the Aegean, because the temporal scale is quite broad, but the geographic distances are much smaller. In some cases we find significant different distances, in other cases we don't. But also don't forget that when I talk about the Aegean, I mean Greece basically, okay, the geographic area of modern Greece. And this has been a crossroad traditionally for many, many years. So besides whatever local variation we find, there is no doubt that we have people moving in from Anatolia, from the Balkans, and we find cultural evidence of mobility events like that. So it's very difficult to determine the role of the terrain against the role of all sorts of other factors, historical, cultural, climatic, and so on in these areas. They're two completely different areas to compare, really. So I would be a bit, I'd rather not compare them.
Okay, so I think we just discussed this, but have non-metric studies ever been paired with something like DNA tests to determine accuracy? Can they be tested on modern humans today?
Yes, they have been tested on modern humans today, and this is why we can test them, we use them with archaeological samples.
Oh, okay.
So there have been many, many studies on modern families, on twins, on laboratory animals, and on populations with known ethnic affiliation, known genetic makeup, and all these studies have found a really high correlation between non-metric trait expression and Y-chromosomal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and autosomal DNA. And this is why we know that these traits can effectively be used as indirect indicators of genetics and genetic affinities.
That's really neat.
It is, yes. I'm not very happy about it too.
It shows a good field. If you could excavate any site at any time, where would it be and why?
Okay, that's a tricky one. It would be in Greece, by the seaside. That's all I can tell you. It would be a cemetery because I'm an osteologist, so it wouldn't make any sense for me to excavate anything else. I don't know, one of the islands. Maybe not prehistoric, because the preservation is really bad, to be honest. I would go for a historic period, which are rather neglected in Greece. But I think for the next 5-6 years, I would rather focus on examining what is already out there, because the problem right now, in Greece at least, is that we have so much material from the historic periods, so from archaic, Hellenistic, Roman, classical, and so on, that is housed in storage facilities of the archaeological units and is not being studied. Some of it has been studied and has been studied very, very well and published, but there is so much more in there. And yeah, I would rather focus on publishing, studying and publishing what is there, and then excavating. But yeah, in the future I would like to have my own cemetery excavation on an island. Historical period, so the preservation is good.
I asked these questions about the landscape and how your studies maybe are altered or affected by the landscape because I am studying landscape archaeology, which was why I was curious. But I have one of my own last personal questions before I ask you our last question. I noticed the landscapes you work in vary dramatically. Do you intend to continue similar studies where you previously visited or look further afield, creating a larger research scheme? I know you didn't want to compare them, but I mean...
No, it's good. What I liked about osteology, and one of the things that really attracted me, is that it gives you the opportunity to work with material worldwide. Human bones, so long as it's Homo sapiens, are pretty much the same. I mean, once you've worked in one area, you can work anywhere else. And this is what I find so fascinating, because in each area you have an entirely different set of questions that make sense and are interesting to approach. So for instance, in Greece, in prehistoric Greece, my question was mobility, because we have so many theories on invasions, colonizations, marital networks and so on. So to me it made sense to examine these questions skeletally. In Africa, the main question was, how does the desert affect these people biologically? What are the stress levels imposed on them by their environment? Right now I'm also engaged in a project in medieval Leicestershire with Anita Radini on combining dental occupational microdebris entrapped in dental calculus with indicators of activity patterns from the postcranial skeleton. So yes, I am very, very interested in examining human skeletal remains from other areas, geographically and temporally, so long as there is an interesting question there. And I'm sure there is always an interesting question. Or you can make one up.
I guess you could, well I'm going to make one up right now. Do you think you could possibly compare the different stressors by region, I guess, by area, like what maybe in the skeletal structure caused so much stress because of the desert, and then maybe in the Aegean, which caused so much stress there, and how are they different?
You could see that, I guess, although I mean, I have to say that activity indicators or stress indicators in the skeleton are not too specific, so we need to be careful as to the level to which we can answer each question. But yes, for instance, in areas with like abnormal terrain, or when people have to walk long distances for whatever reason, we do find increased stress, increased activity markers in the lower limbs, for example. In areas where people row, like in islanders, not in the Aegean, okay, but in other areas where these things have been examined, we find increased stress in the upper limbs. So yes, by examining the human skeleton, you can, to some degree, assess the impact of different stressors on the skeleton. You can draw some conclusions, but again, it depends on the question, it depends on how systematic the stress was, what proportion of the population was engaged in these activities as well. This is something that we sometimes forget, I forget it myself sometimes, that the fact that some people, for instance, engage in rowing activities, that doesn't mean that every single man or woman in the population engaged in this activity. You may have 5 out of the 100 people on a daily basis rowing for whatever reason. So again,
we can see over time how people have changed.
You can, yes, you can. You can see that.
Stress.
But again, it depends. But on many occasions, yes, you can. But you need to always bear in mind the limitations.
Right. And then the last question, if you were to spend a day adventure seeking with Indiana Jones, what 3 things would you bring with you to guarantee your survival?
One thing, I would bring my husband with me, and that would guarantee my survival. He would guarantee I would go nowhere with Indiana Jones. I can tell you this much. So that's it.